All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today we are talking about the often spoken about but poorly understood world of the intersection of cyber, resilience, and preparedness. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at her. All right, and we start off with, we always begin each episode with a big thank you to all of you listening us out there in Cyberland related to today's subject, and all of the people listening through all the different platforms, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whether you're listening to this through the YouTube app or through the Buzzsprout link or at insidemycanoehead.ca, where you will find everything you need to know about this podcast, how to help us out, and how to send us a message and talk to me, the creator, directly. Give me advice. Tell me what I'm doing right, wrong, indifferent, or what you would like to hear in a future episode. So thanks again. And thanks for earlier this week's guest, Janet from Natural Disaster Survival Products. Episode is going meteoric on the pickup, and we really appreciate Janet taking the time to listen to us, to join us, and hopefully, if we're lucky and fortunate, to have her on some future episodes. But listen, cyber, right? The world is all about cyber, and we hear a lot about information at the very, very basic level. And today what we're going to try to do is draw that line between how we frame preparedness here at Inside My Canoe Head and how we frame cyber, and why cyber is probably one of the least understood, yet most influential portions of your preparedness plan. So typically when you think about your preparedness plan, if you're operating in the first 20% of the preparedness spectrum, as we refer to it, you're probably thinking about having plans, making kits, having an evacuation plan, fire plan, copies of important documents, that type of thing. You're living in the first 20% of preparedness. Now, that's the foundation. We don't argue with that whatsoever. In fact, we have a pretty interesting and evidence-based education methodology that we've put in books and courses. And we talk about it throughout the podcast on how to do that from a logical, non-apocalyptic, rational perspective, and a perspective that's evidence-based and that you will not find in your public sector resident-facing preparedness communications. We believe that's appropriate, but once you have all of that stuff done that the government tells you is probably a good idea, most of it is largely junk, but some of the information is reasonably acceptable, you get to the 20 percentile place of preparedness. And often what happens is people cease there. They have an unfortunate belief that they've adopted a prepared life because they have a few things stockpiled in their house and they have some reasonable plan as to what to do when the power goes out. That is an important part, yes, but it is the very minuscule beginning. When we think about preparedness, and this will relate to cyber in a couple of minutes here, really from our perspective, preparedness is a whole of life, right? We talk about adopting a prepared life, and what does that mean? That means when you look at preparedness, you're asking questions like, what does my world look like when I get fired? What does my world look like? Okay, maybe you're not going to get fired. Maybe you're wonderful employee number one. That's great. But what if your place of work burned down tomorrow? What exactly is the plan that your boss or your company will implement when the facilities where you work are lost for whatever reason? What's that strategy? How will you get paid? Will you get paid? What happens when your home burns down? Do you know? Are you intimately familiar with the intricacies and the clauses of your home insurance? Most people buy fire insurance because it's required by their mortgage. They shop around for the lowest rate that has the minimally accepted coverage by law. They sign it. The deeds go off to the mortgage company. Everybody's happy and you carry on with life. Very few people will read that document, understand it, and understand the limitations and the duties, responsibilities, and obligations that are placed on your shoulder by being the insured individual. You don't know what you're supposed to execute. You don't know what you're required to do in times of calamity and emergency. And if you fail to do some of the things you're required to do, that may impact your coverage. Unfortunately, all you have to do is watch a series of interviews of people who have gone through recent wildfire losses of their home to realize there is so much more complexity to that world of insurance they were not aware of. It's 1.5 to 2 years, if you're lucky in a fortunate world, to get that home rebuilt and reoccupy Do you know exactly what your life looks like during that? Or are you simply going to wing it? That's the difference when we talk about preparedness. We just don't talk about power outages and stuff like that. We talk about the 80% left. It's about having a strategic outlook for life. Cyber's the same way. If you think about cyber, what everybody's told to do right now is protect your identity online, limit the places where you store data, and change your passwords regularly. Don't open an attachment from an email, an attachment on an email from somebody you don't know, etc. And there's a whole bunch of pretty simplistic rules that, for the most place, will keep you protected from phishing scams. The difference is that's the 20% in cyber, right? That hits you to the 20% basic level to get you into baby infancy steps of accepting cyber. The next 80%, very similar to preparedness, transitions yourself into more complex ideas. What does your world look like when the elements of critical infrastructure on which you rely are lost to a cyber disruption? I'll give you a prime example. There have been a number of healthcare systems that have been affected in North America by ransomware attacks or just direct shutdowns, denial of service attacks. So when that system goes down, your ability to access healthcare is reduced, impacted, or otherwise potentially totally shut off. So when we look at preparedness plans, when we take you past the 20% and you start to work into the strategic environment, you start to examine your exposure to and dependency on the 10 sectors of critical infrastructure. You start to realize that you have a certain dependency on the healthcare system being available, and part of your preparedness strategy then becomes, what are my possible options when my local health network no longer is available? And we like to phrase it in the simplistic terms of no longer available, because then you don't worry whether it was a cyber attack that took them down, a terrorist event, just a local fire, a water main break in a big Western Canadian city, whatever it may be. There's all kinds of these exogenous shocks that can happen beyond your control that can reduce your ability to access or prevent you accessing one of these 10 sectors of critical infrastructure. Each one of these is enabled by 2 of the 10 sectors. Simplify it, it's power and cyber. Each one of those require both to be functioning and operational, which makes each one vulnerable to the loss of service. So your healthcare system requires cyber access, and it requires power access to be successful. Your transportation system, your government system, your financial market system, your food distribution and your water distribution systems, they all require cyber to work, and they all require power generation to work, right? So now you understand that the cyber is not just you and your password and somebody locking you out of your Instagram account. It's somebody locking you out of your entire bank account. What's your strategy? What are you thinking when you open your TD or your Bank of Montreal or your Bank of America app and there's nothing there? It's gone. Is all you're going to do right now is pick up a 1-800 helpline? Think about that for a second. You're probably not the only one affected. So if the bank goes down and a couple of million people lose access, do you think you're going to be, where do you think you're going to be in that phone queue when you pick up the phone? What are your responsibilities under your cardholder agreement and under your account agreement? You remember that long thing that you signed and nobody ever reads when they gave that to you at the bank? Well, inside there are all your duties, responsibilities, and obligations as a debit card holder, as a credit card holder, and what you're required to do in the times of ID theft and emergencies that may affect your ability to get your own money back, right? It's just not call the bank and say, I lost it, and then magically expect the bank to fill it. You have a role to play in this entire system. 99% of the people out there, might be a bit of over-exaggeration, a little bit of hyperbole on my part, but I'm going to guess that the plurality or majority of people listening to this podcast have never actually read those cardholder agreements that you sign with Visa, MasterCard, or your debit card holder, explaining what you're supposed to do, and embedded within them is cyber. And I'll give you another example. I recently had my home insurance renewed. Great provider, love them to death. Great broker team. They've helped me out. Wonderful human beings. In there was a natural renewal. It went up it went up a little bit less than the rate of inflation, so I'm perfectly happy with that. But in there was a definition of data. There was an addendum to the policy outlining what data is, how the insurance company / industry define data, and what protections of data are and are not included in my home insurance policy, right? Because remember, I have contents insurance. You probably have content insurance for your property as well. Is it replacement or depreciated value? I mean, those are different types of policies, but what data is covered and what value for data? And I'll give you a prime example. I run a business from a home office, right? So inside my home office are all the drives and everything else that contains all the computer data for my company. If this house burns down, is the insurance company on the hook for the replacement value of that data? Even if it's just your personal data, right? Say you have, if you're a university student. I did 11 and a half years of university full time. I've got a lot of papers. I've got a lot of data. I've got a lot of things that I've written. I've written thousands of pages of published material. When you lose that data to an event in your home, is that covered by your home insurance? Because it may cost thousands of dollars to replace that lost data, right? If you had a whole bunch of things that were revenue generating for you that you've now lost access to, that you have to go recreate, the opportunity at cost of that could be $10,000 or $20,000. What's covered in an emergency? Again, this falls short when you think preparedness is just that first 20% and not the final 80 strategic piece. And the same thing with cyber. When you think protecting cyber is just changing your passwords, having a backup somewhere, and not looking at the 80% that can cause you all kinds of ridiculous pain when you lose access to your own personal material, community organization, whether you're at work, whatever it may be. So swing fire over to resilience, a topic that we talk about regularly here at Inside My Canoe Head. Now, resilience has about 30 plus accepted academic definitions. It means a lot of different things to people, but basically it's your ability and your capability to navigate shocks beyond your control and limit their effect on your normal operations, right? So the difference of a resilient individual and a non-resilient individual is if there's a significant event in society, the resilient individual actually just carries on with their life. I mean, they may be bounced around a little bit. They may be punched 1 or 2 times in the head, like Mike Tyson reference, but a resilient individual largely maintains a normal status quo life, irrespective of the disaster and emergency that's going around them. A non-resilient person becomes a professional victim, right? They shut down, they hunker down, they stop doing what they're doing. They're focused on survival, not thriving, right? That's the difference between resilience and non-resilient people. I argue, and many blogs and people disagree with me, and I think this is a wonderful part of the discourse, is you can't adjust resilience. You adjust things that adjust resilience. For example, as you increase your preparedness level as an individual, corporation, community organization, whatever it may be, as you increase your mitigation measures, as you set recovery and response up for success, you increase your resilience, but you can't increase your resilience on your own directly. You increase other things, and resilience is a byproduct of those actions. Other people disagree with me. That's perfectly fine. Love disagreement, because when you have homogeneity in science, you're in trouble. It's the old 10th man out of World War Z, one of my favorite movies, is that if you start getting group speak and everybody in the room is agreeing, somebody in that room has to stand up to fight back. Fight for the other idea, fight for the difference, because it can get very, very scary when everybody just nods and waves at the dude or the lady at the head of the table. So if you think about that, we live in a modern technologically enabled society, right? That cyber is intertwined with almost everything you do. Now we have baseball stats for our kids' baseball leagues, soccer leagues, hockey leagues. It's all online, right? You access all this amazing amount of things through a series of passwords, etc. You are open to having that information compromised. I don't know how many times that I've heard of private sector organizations and community organizations losing access to data or having data hacked, etc. People who preload credit card information into less than reputable sites. Dangerous. So the question then becomes for everybody listening to this, understanding that cyber plays this role, understanding that cyber, like power, underpins every activity that you intend to do, from operating the elevator in your apartment building to everything else is based upon internet access. Let's talk about what you as an individual, an organization, and a corporate entity can start thinking about. We'll move past the 20%. Everybody understands that. You change your passwords regularly, etc. Once you get into strategic thinking always begins with what the military refers to as intelligence preparation of the battle space. That means understanding the environment in which you're choosing to operate. So I am a preparedness, Inside My Canoe Head is owned by Preparedness Labs Incorporated, which is a preparedness education firm, right? So I operate in the educational space. I operate in the online educational space. I operate in the podcast. I operate in video format. I have several published books. So I have to understand the environment when I operate. So when I operate online, I'm exposed to a whole bunch of product sites, gateways that I choose to use and not to use to process information and process sales to clients. How do I generate revenue? All of this world that I choose to live in by conducting my business the way I do, my community organization, or my own personal life, I have to understand the world I'm in and describe it and paint it. Now, the military process, I've written a couple of blogs on bringing that forward into emergency management as a discipline, but more so what we do in some of our mentoring with our clients at the business side of it is we work on strategic planning for life, right? Strategic thinking for life first, and eventually transition to strategic planning. Understanding the environment you're in. What do you do? Where do you work? First, okay. What is the risk profile that exists for that? So what risks and hazards are you exposed to by choosing to operate where you do? So if you're a logistics shipping firm, and we've worked with a couple in the logistics industry where you're shipping around the world, right? So you're shipping to regional ports, etc. Let's just use the Seafarers Association, for example. When you ship with them, you're not only exposed to what's going on in your home port. Let's say it's Halifax, Nova Scotia, and you're shipping internationally, right? What's going on in the port of Rotterdam, the port of Singapore, in Indonesia, various ones in the Suez Canal, the Red Sea. All of these things impact your business, placing you at risk, placing additional threats against what you're doing. These are all things that you have to categorize and understand it. And a lot of people find that a bit overwhelming. So what I'll use here as a descriptor of how to get into this strategic thinking is the first thing that we always teach supply chain management students is to map the supply chain, right? We can't do anything with what you think you need to do, agile, lean, designing, efficiency, effectiveness. All these other buzzwords are highly irrelevant if the individual does not understand their entire supply chain, right? So the supply chain would look on a map very much like starting at the process of getting the raw materials out of the ground to the final end process of disposing of the used good or service, and absolutely every interaction that happens in between. And it's a bit of a laborious exercise, but strategic thinking is about understanding the environment. Then when you understand the environment, which you look at in front of you, then you have the ability to say, okay, what risks are each one of these steps or major muscle movements referred to. So I usually generate it into 5 to 7 sections of that supply chain, and then I look at each one and I say, okay, in this section, what are the unique risks or hazards that we're focused against? For example, if you're working with a seafarers association that ships to the Persian Gulf, right? So you're a transnational shipper out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, and you're shipping to the Persian Gulf, right? You're using one of two routes. You're going through the Suez Canal and down through the Red Sea, and with a Houthi rebel conflict there, or you're going around the Horn of Africa to come up through Somali pirate zones, etc., to get into the Persian Gulf. Those are pluses and minuses, costs included, and threats from different actors. But when you start breaking all of this down, you get a profile. You start drawing out information. What you do from that point then is understanding what the risk is. What's the probability? And risk is basically the probability times the severity of the outcome. What's the probability based upon your today's data of my ship getting hijacked or attacked by Houthi rebels in the Red Sea? It is X percentage. What's the severity of that? Well, it'll cost me so many millions of dollars per day. Probability times severity equals your risk profile. And you build this out. What this does is make an informed decision. We've all heard that saying before, right? Everybody's supposed to make an informed decision. Well, an informed decision means you do the intelligence analysis first. And this is the legwork that usually keeps people out of the 80 part of strategic thinking, and then strategic planning when it comes to preparedness, and when it comes to your other ideas of like cyber, power, and different things, is that there's a lot of cognitive work involved. This is not a question of expenditures. We're not asking anybody to spend any money. We're saying there's a bit of time and effort that has to be dedicated up front to understand the environment in which you've chosen to operate and the risks that are present because you've chosen to operate in that area. And I keep phrasing it like that because you don't have to operate in any specific area. There are benefits to you doing that, and you understand those benefits, but by doing that, you're accepting the risks that exist in the area. And when you understand that, you build a risk profile, and then you start looking at, how do I mitigate against those risks? And when you think about cyber, how do I mitigate it, right? How do I transmit data? How do I accept information? Which payment processors am I choosing to use? Those start getting in from a corporate perspective. But when we roll it to your individual perspective, when you purchase online, where do you purchase from, right? Do you purchase through a trusted seller? Like, for example, you only buy your support goods, let's just call it that, off of Amazon. And you do that because Amazon as a corporation will back up anything that happens on their platform. Good, bad, or indifferent, you'll be far more successful than trying to reach out and get to the seller and trying to get information out of them sometimes. So, and these are just little strategies that you can think about, like, where do I buy online? Where do I shop online? What do I expose to? Is this a reputable business, and do I feel comfortable leaving my credit card information preloaded into this machine? Or do I take the two different parts of safety that is? Use Apple Pay or Google Pay. Because what happens when you use Apple Pay or Google Pay, the merchant doesn't get your credit card information. They get an account transfer information from Apple. So you're protected because the people at the other end, and Shop is the same way through Shopify. The person at the other end does not get your data, so you're not breaching the data. But if you go to an independent vendor's website and they're asking for you to put all of this information in, and would you like to save the credit card, think about that. I'm an individual that twice in 1 year had a credit card hacked. Now, not a problem, because I get my credit cards through reputable companies, reputable banks who back it up both times when I caught it. They just canceled. They just stopped the card. They covered and erased the charges. Didn't cost me anything. And in in about 2 weeks, I had a physical card. Within 24 hours, I had a new electronic card to go going. The challenge with it is it's a pain in the butt of changing all of your subscriptions and preloads and everything else. So you want to try to avoid that as much by insulating yourself, by not exposing your card more than necessary. So I use Apple Pay or Google Pay or Shop Pay whenever I can, because it's just brilliant. It protects your thing. And I will rarely load up my credit card into a computer system just because it seems to be easier, right? I would rather get a monthly bill for my credit, for whatever it might be, something I'm subscribed to, show up in my email and then plug in there and use my Apple Pay to pay it than I would to hand my credit card information and load it up and have it permanently there, right? Another big thing in cybersecurity people miss when you get into the strategic profile is how many people have software on their phone. Virus protection and malware protection software on their phone. Very few people do it, right? Some people go a step to using a VPN to try to keep you hidden on public networks. A rational strategy might be to just not use public networks, right? I simply don't. I just use the data that's on my plan when I can. Periodically, like when I've taken via rail, I've used it, but I have other precautions on my phone to protect the data and the interaction that happens online. When you take these strategic steps, I understand my exposure to the world. I understand the risk that it brings. I've mitigated against it. You've done everything. What's another step that you can do? Buy insurance. I have identity theft insurance, and my corporation does as well. So I pay, in Canadian terms, $300 a year, and that covers me for identity theft, which means I get X number of millions of dollars of access to legal firms, liability coverage, damage coverage, and various different things if my identity is ever stolen, right? So I actively pay for the insurance, and part of the insurance program is I have to take a bit of training, and it's really cool that they make you take training on cybersecurity. And then what you do is I have them watching a bunch of things. Like, I think about your credit cards, right? Every transaction that happens with my credit card, I get an alert. So the second my credit card is processed anywhere for any reason on the face of this earth, I get an instantaneous alert on my phone, right? So does my cybersecurity team. I call them my cybersecurity team to make it cool. It's really just the contracted company that I use, and they'll send me an alert, right? They found this on a recent cyber release, had your email on it, or had your password on it, or had your whatever on it. Your password has been compromised. Now, there's a lot of those out there, and most of them I don't really pay attention to because I change my passwords on a very regular basis. But I pay to ensure that I cover my very important exposure to the cyber world, right? So with a higher level of access, for example, I use Apple Care products, right? I use Apple. I'm an Apple guy. Some people are Google. Some people are Samsung. Doesn't matter. One is not superior to the other. We could argue all day. I use Apple products, and I pay for Apple Care. What does that mean? So when I have a significant emergency with my Apple products, I go to a faster routing service than people who don't have it. I get exceptional level access to immediate person-to-person, not chatbot, not call back in 2 hours, but immediate, within a very short period of time, access to a human being who can actually help me out at Apple. That is hugely, for me, worth the money. So when you add that up, that's another probably $150 a year. So you add that up, we're probably looking at close to $500 a year that I spend on cybersecurity, on top of doing smart things and trying to do less dumb things in the run of the day. But I actively subscribe, and this is part of strategic planning because I understand the value of my access to the cyber world. I understand what the price of a loss looks like, and it's a heck of a lot more than $500. For example, if I lose access to a number of my cloud-based and IT-based data points, I basically go dark. And because I don't have access to that data, it's very difficult to do what I do and service the clients that I do. And so because of that, I need to protect that both with smart software, smart practices, but insurance to help back it up, because I don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to conduct a fight with somebody over access to locked data or something along that lines, whereas my insurance policy buys me that. Think about when you go to Disney, do you buy the front of the line tickets just because it's freaking easier, right? Do you? I do. When you fly, do you buy priority check-in at the airport, and do you buy priority security screening? I do, because I just fly right through. There's lineups of 200 people in that little snaky queue to go through security. I go right by all that right to the front. Am I super good? No. I just know the opportunity cost of standing there is a pain in the butt and I don't want to pay for it. So I spend for protection and I spend for convenience, but what that does is that insulates. Now, does it perfectly insulate? Absolutely not. My preparedness level is not 100%. My resilience is not 100%, and I am exposed to cybercrime. And I'll give you a prime example. I just recently finished a fight on a copyright struggle. Somebody thought one of my photos that I used on a blog on preparednesslabs.ca, the parent company website, they had a digital right to it, and threats and back and forth and it wasn't spam because this is an actual copyright company who was contacting me with human beings. I got my service provider involved where I got the photo from, and it literally took 3 weeks of reasonable levels of effort from everybody for this person just to go away and understand, oh, you did have, okay, well, thank you very much. Sorry for the inconvenience, right? That's real. I've had somebody challenge me on thoughts and things that I've said because they believed them to be theirs before. And of course, I have all the data. I have all the evidence. At this point now, because of having gone through a couple of these events where I've been challenged and threatened with lawsuits and fines, and I spend money on protection. For example, we recently purchased a subscription. We're building out a couple of more video courses that'll be coming out in the run of the year. And so what we've done is we've bought a subscription to a royalty-free video and picture service. So everything you see I'm putting up online of pictures and people walking around in video, that's all royalty-free. The reason being is the next person that comes down the line and says, you're using one of my products, I can tell them to pound salt. Here's the address of the court in Canada where you are required to file claim because I am not subject to any laws outside the country of Canada. Here's the address. Here's the link to the page where you have to go to start your claim. And I'm looking forward to the day in court. Have a great day. Because I've had to make thinking there was a cheap, easy way to do it, I'm now doing it the appropriate way. Does it cost me a bit of money? Yeah, it does. It's about $300 Canadian a year. Add that onto the previous. Now I'm up to about $800 when I include the business side, right? Cyber insurance for the business is not cheap. It is tens of thousands of dollars. I do not have that beyond the theft of the copyright and the trademark, whatever that may be for the company. So that's a dangerous exposure that people have out there. But you have to understand the environment in which you choose to operate. If you're going to jump on the podcast circuit and you're going to say things out in the air, you have to carry insurance, right? So I carry insurance because there's always some litigious person out there who believes that they've been wronged in some way or form. So you have to carry insurance to cover that. You also have to carry insurance in case somebody thinks you're using something that belongs to them and they want to fight you in a long copyright. They'll just kind of say, hey, listen, just top me a couple of G's, right? Drop me a couple of G's. You're a company, you got a little bit of money kicking around. Drop me a couple of G's, this all goes away, right? So all they're looking for is a bit of money, and you have to stand on principle. Where standing on principle is not free, right? Standing on principle costs you money, but that's the nature. So if you're going to get into the space and you choose to operate there, you have to understand the environment in which you operate and the risks and hazards you're exposed to. Accepting those risks and hazards, you then have to decide your level of mitigation you're willing to do. How much time, effort, and money are you going to spend to provide a bit of insurance and insulation blanket around what you intend to do? That's no different than your life, right? I'll end with this offering thought for you. When we sit down and we think about what we do for a living and what we do and our activities and our leisure and our family activities, basically how I decide to run my life, and you look at that big picture, just sitting back with your cup of coffee, your feet up on the table, nothing complex. Just reflect on the risks that are now present because you've decided to do something in a certain arena. Now they're present. You're exposed to them. What do you think the possible impacts are, and what would you do with that? That is the beginning of strategic thinking. That opens the gateway, takes you past the 20% of password protection, backups, and all that basic IT stuff. And it's no different than we teach in preparedness, right? The gateway we use for preparedness is the third of the trifecta of preparedness plans that should be part of every basic preparedness plan in a family. The third leg of that trifecta is, what are you going to do when you get fired? Not that you intend to get fired, and you're probably a great person, but just look back at the pandemic, right? Look at all those incredible, wonderful people doing good jobs for healthy companies that were fired for no reason alone, right? Tonight, while you're sitting having your margarita, the building you work at may burn down by something totally along your control. You get up tomorrow morning, and your primary source of income for your family has ceased. What is your plan? That's when people start to realize we open the door to exposure, and they realize, no, preparedness is a heck of a lot more than a couple of kits and some candles and a flashlight and an evacuation plan and a list of important documents, right? There is a whole strategic world of 80% of the preparedness sphere that you're not even touching until you open that door. And that's why we use financial preparedness as that key to getting people to think. We do the same, and our argument today is the same with cyber. You are exposed to a significant set of cyber risks that you may not truly understand based upon the choices you make. We're telling you, we're recommending, we're strongly encouraging you to take the time to understand that risk profile that you've accepted by undertaking the activities you do in cyberspace, and understanding that those 10 sectors of critical infrastructure that you rely upon for your modern technologically enabled life, they require cyber as well. What does your world look like when the financial industry is down? I don't know what you do for a living, but if you can't access any of your bank accounts for the next 10 days, what does your world look like? Maybe it's irrelevant. Maybe it doesn't impact you. Maybe it's critical. Maybe it is life-changing if you can't get access to that on a day-to-day basis. Everybody's going to be different. That's why you got to investigate your own risk profile. Thanks for joining us this week at Inside My Canoe Head. We really appreciate your continued support. Drop over to the website, www.insidemycanoehead.ca, for us good old Canadians, eh? Thank you very much. We appreciate your support. Please, if there's something you'd love to hear, tell us. We ask you to do one thing and one thing only, and that's to share the podcast with someone else. Thanks again. Take care and stay safe.